Okay, so this is the second part of chapter 5.
Whitaker's watch, which miraculously still worked, ticked away the hours. The sun burned off the mist, and by 11 a.m. its glow ruled the sky. 4 hours ago they had welcomed the warmth. Now the heat was unbearable. Whitaker stripped off his undershirt and soaked it in the ocean. He draped it over his head and felt the cool water run down his face. Moments later he was sweating under the makeshift canopy, losing precious liquid with each bead that appeared on his face. He tried holding the shirt inches above his head to let the breeze blow through. As the heat bore down, the wind picked up. The rafts rode the waves at an uneven pace. 1 minute Whitaker's raft pulled ahead, jerking the rafts on the other end of the line. A minute later it lagged, banging into Rickenbacker, Adamson, and Bartek. That brought the donut rocketing in from behind, with DeAngelis and Alex clinging to its flimsy sidewalls. Every bump nudged tempers closer to the edge. Knees were forced into backs and elbows into heads. Skin, already raw with salt water, chafed against canvas. Adamson growled in pain. Bartek complained that he didn't have enough space. Someone else moaned about the heat. Before long, angry sniping filled the air between the rafts. Captain Cherry made a makeshift sail with his T-shirt and 2 oars. It seemed to help keep the rafts apart, but it didn't solve the real problem. The men were getting anxious, and it wasn't just the close quarters or the heat. More than anything, it was the empty sky above them. As sunset approached, they had been drifting for more than 24 hours without a plane or boat in sight. The scorching heat receded, and in its place came the nagging feeling that they had been cavalier about their chances of being rescued. The base at Canton had no idea where they were. What if no one else had picked up their SOS? The men couldn't help replaying the sequence of events that had dropped them into the sea. Captain Cherry, DeAngelis, and Bartek felt it all could have been avoided if they had taken their time after the first plane failed. The octant could have been replaced, the new plane inspected, and the direction finder fixed. There was no point in saying it, but the thought was in the air like the whine of a mosquito. If Rickenbacker hadn't been in such a hurry, they would be safely en route from Canton to the Western Pacific right now. But that wasn't Rickenbacker's way. If you travel when there's a war on, he believed, you have to be willing to take risks. The enemy doesn't wait for engineers to check everything and check it again. There was no time for prissy safeguards in the army. And so here they were, stranded somewhere in the Central Pacific. DeAngelis had taken readings on the stars the night before. Now, with Whitaker's watch, he checked the exact time of the sunset. 5 minutes earlier than the night before, he claimed, meant they had drifted 50 miles during the day. In fact, they had traveled about 25 or 30, probably west and a little south. But where had they started? Rickenbacker pulled out the map of the Pacific, which had so far stayed dry enough to read. He and Cherry thought they had gone down west and north of Canton, which put them dangerously close to enemy waters. The Japanese-held Gilbert Islands lay 500 or 600 miles west and a little north of Canton. If they were right, they could easily be within range of Japanese planes. DeAngelis believed they were south of Canton. If he was right, they might be beyond the enemy's reach. But it also meant they were floating in a large triangle of empty ocean. Canton, the only inhabited land in the Phoenix Islands, lay at the northeast point of the triangle. The Gilberts occupied the northwest point. Another 600 miles to the south lay the Ellis Islands. They were lost in a vast no-man's land. In the entire triangle, not a single tiny crest of land broke the surface of the ocean. No regular shipping lanes crossed anywhere near their position. The supply route to Australia ran through Fiji and Samoa, another 500 miles south. of the Ellises. One by one, the men confronted a grim possibility. They could be completely on their own. There might be planes up there searching for them, but inside that triangle lay 150,000 square miles of empty ocean. They hadn't been able to find an entire island when they were circling up there. Would the search planes really be able to spot 3 tiny rafts? They began to calculate their chances of finding land. If they were headed southwest, they might run into the Ellis Islands. But that entire island chain made up only 10 square miles of land. It would take a miracle to wash up on 10 square miles of sand and coral in 68 million square miles of water. Rickenbacker spoke up with his own calculations. He claimed they could make it to Fiji, a much larger target, in 18 to 25 days. He didn't really believe it himself, and 18 days with no food, water, or shelter seemed like an eternity. But Rickenbacker felt that the men needed something to hope for. Fiji would have to do. As darkness fell, conversation trailed off. Bartek had stashed a Bible with a zippered cover in his pocket before they left the plane. Now he dug it out and read to himself. Captain Cherry pulled out the very pistol to send up a different kind of prayer. He stuck a flare in the barrel and aimed at the sky. The first one went nowhere. The second rose and burned for a few seconds before dropping into the sea. The third rose high, floated on its parachute, and turned the sky bright red for a minute and a half. For several minutes after it burned out, they peered into the darkness, hoping that a star might turn into the taillight of a plane. Finally, they settled in for another sleepless night. Adamson took out a pencil and scratched the date on the sidewall of the raft. Thursday, October 22nd. The nearest piece of the mainland United States lay at least 4,000 miles away, and the men could only wonder what their families were doing. It would have been midnight in California. Whitaker's daughter, Shirley, would be in bed. What would his son Thomas be up to at the Navy base in San Francisco? In Texas, it was 2 a.m., and Cherry's 5-year-old daughter, Paula, was surely asleep. What about Rickenbacker's wife, Adelaide, in New York? And Bartek's parents in their New Jersey house, where his sister's bed now lay empty? Did they know yet what had happened to the B-17? The men hoped it hadn't made the newspapers, because the headlines would surely declare them dead. But had their families gotten a phone call from the Army, a telegram, or the most ominous messenger of all, a man in uniform knocking at the front door?